Chair shall also inquire as to whether there are any known conflicts of interest with any matters coming before the board at this time. We have any conflicts? Okay, we have a fairly straightforward agenda today. I think we've got 3 action items and a couple information items on the agenda. Yeah, I got it.
Once is enough.
We had it yesterday, didn't we? Who's got their phone on? Secret recording. Can you hear that? Is it an echo still?
It is.
Maybe not.
Okay. Okay. So hearing no changes to the agenda, we will stay with that agenda. Let's move to approval of the minutes, and let me preface this conversation. I had a discussion with Commissioner Tweedy yesterday. And one of the things now that we have, no good deed goes unpunished, but now that we're using AI to help consolidate the initial consolidation of minutes, Richard, we can put timestamps, I think, on there. We did, and we did on the draft. The thing that I saw that confused me, a couple things. Well, let's go to Commissioner Tweedy's concern is now that we're abbreviating the minutes a little bit, it would be nice to have the timestamps on those at the major headings, not like they were throughout on this one. So I hear that, and we're going to consider that. The reason I wanted to take them off for this first run at this with the timestamp was they were everywhere. And even for me as the chair, I had to read them and say, what are these parenthetical numbers and why are they everywhere? So they're almost distracting. The other concern I've got is we've taken a lot of time to reduce the complexity of these minutes. And while I think the timestamp's a good idea, we set the expectation that we provide a timestamp every time and that timestamp will be right. So we're potentially adding some complexity that may shoot ourselves in the foot for trying to simplify a little bit. So we won't have it for this set, but what I've advised Lois before this meeting is I want her to keep those timestamps on there. So we don't want to lose the timestamps. But as always, Ellie's got the timestamps, Lois has the timestamps, and our new executive director have the timestamps for this meeting, for these set of meetings and the next one. So if anybody's got a question on the timestamps, we can get them. And then I'll come back after we take it under advisement at the next meeting and say whether we're going to just no timestamps or whether we'll put them just at the major headings. So I don't think this is a substance issue, but it's also not a major issue on the minutes. This is probably the most interesting conversation we've had on minutes in a long time. But I do think it's important. And so the timestamps will help if we can do it. I also want to look at what are other boards and commissions doing. And Richard, in your storied career, your crowning moment, maybe you consolidated the minutes with AI and put timestamps on there for the whole state. But if we're the first to do it, I want to advise everybody that we are the first to have AI initially generated minutes with timestamps. And if we're not, maybe we don't want to be on the bleeding edge either. So let's just see what we come up with.
We should be set. Why don't we want to set the bar?
I want to set it low,
Best
man. I want to minimize expectations, but I agree with, I don't take exception if you want to add anything to that. What we talked about.
Just from my perspective, it can be pretty simple. Just the major topics can have timestamps, but the idea came out of me going back and trying to look through one of the recordings that are about 2 hours long. So if you're looking for a specific thing, you got to click through it and you got to listen for a minute to see what's being talked about. Okay, that's not it. It's a little painful. So I think just having timestamps at the major headings. So for example, this agenda for today would have 4 timestamps, 1 at each item, action and info item. So I don't think that's too onerous, and I think it'd be helpful for folks going back because our minutes are losing nuance now, and I understand, and I'm okay with that. But that I think is at times is going to drive us to want to go back to the recording and look at actually what was said. So.
Yep. Well, just let me get with Richard and Ellie and Lois and John, and let's all just come back to this commission with that. But I understand where you're coming from, and I don't disagree with you. I don't want to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory of finally taking 50 pages and making it not a 2-week episode, but maybe a week episode. So, yes,
Just
Mr. Jaspers.
can I just ask a question for clarification? What AI system are you using or is being used for the minutes? Do you know?
Okay.
The open one or the closed one?
The open.
Okay.
Okay.
There are ones that are closed.
Yeah, we have to pay for those. We can do that if we need to. Just been using what's made available to all.
Yeah, so let me speak. Richard and I have had these conversations, and it's not as simple, and I think Higgins was involved too, but just the whole use of AI, what's confidential and what's not, we've all been through that already. I think we're using public recordings.
At this point, I mean, if y'all would like to use closed, we can definitely do that. So that's available to us.
So the closed system learns from itself.
Right.
So that could make actually a difference, like, let's say, years down the road, where you refer back to meetings from, let's say,
Right.
you
And
know,
that's a great point, because there is some issues with consistency along, because
Exactly.
every time
That's
you do
exactly
new
right.
minutes with the same questions, it comes up a little bit.
right, and
So
then
that's a
it
great
can
point.
actually integrate it with information from meetings that happened prior, because it learns from itself and it's a closed
Very,
system.
very good point. Very good point. We're also going to try to conform the committee minutes as well. If that's something that y'all would wish to do so that there's consistency among the minutes. I know they're a little different because some are using AI now, some aren't. So we're going to try to make some consistency. We're planning to get together soon after this meeting and kind of go through protocols with questions and how to come up with that to be consistent among the committees and the commission minutes.
There are other government agencies who are using their internal systems. There's a AI.gov system that's just internally government. So there are systems like that.
Thank you for those comments.
Yes. Oh, and I'll add, the reason Richard's talking is because, as I think, as you guys know from orientation experience, DWR is set up as the lead division to work with the EMC, and that's why you see both Richard and Lois doing a lot of our records and agendas and minutes. So that's why DWR is up here and not Mike or Toby or one of the other guys. So, okay. Okay, so we'll get back with you in March with a further tweak. I do just want to compliment, I mean, it's been, guys, this has plagued us for way back to Ben Hudson or before about how to get minutes efficiently done. And it sounds simple, but I've seen a lot of good vice chairs go down in flames trying to work with Lois and the department and the divisions and being consistent. It doesn't sound that hard, but it's very important. And I think we've made great strides in the last 3 or 4 meetings to do what Richard and his team have done to break into a brave new way of doing it. So I do thank the department for that and thank all the commissioners for your patience as we go through this. So going to the minutes of January 8th meeting, do we have any comments or questions or, yes?
One question, and speaking of nuance, a nuance that didn't jump out at me, but I recall from our conversations, especially with PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, that while we went forward with the minimization plans, we were going to continue to go down the path of developing numeric standards. And that there was a little bit of mention on the 1,4-dioxane, but not for PFAS. And I think that would be important to explicitly call out, even in that short summarized section of the minutes.
Okay. Do we want to postpone the minutes till next time to add something in, or do we want to approve the minutes and add a statement similar to 1,4-dioxane into the minutes?
I don't understand, Mr. Chairman, I don't understand that comment or question. I don't understand it.
Yes. Further clarification.
So in our conversation, we said that the intent of the commission and the committees would be to continue to move forward with developing numeric standards. But in the meantime, we were going to go with the minimization plan. So, and as we even heard yesterday with the presentation from Mark Hartman at FDA, that this was part of a process from the historical discussions that in the pathway of developing numeric standards, information was going to continue to be collected. But I think especially from a public perspective, it would be important to note that we're not checking the box and moving on, that we are still going to be looking at these compounds and still moving ahead with the process of developing numeric standards. But in the meantime, we're not doing nothing. We're still going to have a minimization plan. So I just feel like that's important to be transparent and clear about that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to that.
Sure.
Yes,
Mr.
slow
King.
and steady now for a year. So I concur with keeping it on the table and not in a drawer.
Yeah.
So slow and steady, working on numeric standard.
Yeah, and
That's the committee as chairs.
And
Board of
further,
Quality Committee with
further,
surface water.
but further
Thank you.
further clarification, I think on the PFAS track, there was discussion, it was in the triennial review, out of the triennial review. I think there is a committee motion that says we will continue on with the PFAS track already in place. But that was a little bit more questionable than very direct motions that were made in committee, which are on the record, to say we would go down the numeric path with, starting with FDA, and we would do the monitoring minimization. That is a direct committee motion that we have to abide by as a commission. So I don't know why one was mentioned or not, but there is a little bit of a fine distinction between having formal motion in committee to keep moving on PFAS. And that's always been on the table.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be bad to put it in here either. So if you guys want to hold the minutes till next time, I'm seeing enough nods, that'll be fine, and we can add a similar sentence as what we have with PFAS in. Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good resolution, but I think it does flag something else about the minutes, that minutes obviously need to capture actions by the committees and the commission, but there are often outstanding questions or direction to staff, things that don't fall in that category. So I think we're just going to need to keep an eye on that, because those things need to be reflected in the minutes as well, to have some way to track what the committee and the commission's actions are and what the follow-up needs to be. So I guess we can add that to the list of things to keep an eye on, see how well AI is capturing not just actions, but follow-up needs.
Yeah, and I'm trusting the AI really to keep us from Richard and I, from the 100%, which was 50 or 60 pages that Lois had to go through and get down to something y'all could read. Best we could do was 20 in 2 weeks. That's hard work, guys. So AI is getting us down to half dozen pages or something with all that time. But for everybody's sake, we're not relying on AI as much as we are getting the foundation, and then we're going back and trying to add to it and confirm everything. So to the point, I agree with the point, because I think we've got to look at each of these topics individually and say what needs to be significant. Now, I'll try to make a little funny out of the thing. When we were doing commissioner comments, it's funny what AI thinks is important and not, especially if it's not trained, because all of y'all have, 15 times 3, y'all have 45 comments, and AI will tell us only 10 of what y'all say is important. Well, that's going to hurt somebody's feelings a little bit. So that's why I say we don't even put commissioner comments in the comment section. Go back and listen to the tape. But we do need to pay attention in the main body of the base. Yeah. So anyway, we'll move on. So let me move on to the other addition, and I want to do this in 2 phases today, because I want to talk about a little bit about who he is, because he's sitting over here on the side, and I think most of y'all have met John Evans already. But we will, on the regular agenda, I want to talk about more where we are and where we're going. In this part, I want to just introduce John briefly. And for the public record, I'll just kind of give the same information that I gave to commissioners that's out in the public. But pleased to announce that the Honorable John C. Williams will serve as the first executive director. Evans. What'd I do?
Williams.
See? All right, Judge, sorry. It says Evans right here. Evans will serve as the first executive director of the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission. Judge Evans is currently, when I sent it to y'all, an administrative law judge, and has previously served in several key roles at the North Carolina Department of Justice and as DEQ General Counsel. As the DEQ Chief Deputy Secretary, he oversaw all divisions within the department and played pivotal roles in such things as the coal ash management and the state's response to the Clean Power Plan. Judge Evans is also a mechanical engineer with specialized expertise in air quality. His experience includes writing, reviewing, and approving air permits, as well as serving as an expert witness. His regulatory background spans multiple roles at DEQ and at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm excited to welcome Judge Evans' breadth and depth of experience to the EMC. His management, leadership, and technical expertise will strengthen our collective efforts to maintain and improve North Carolina's environment and quality of life. So that's what I gave to you guys. I want to welcome John. He started last Monday, so he's almost 2 weeks in the saddle. The good part about Judge Evans is he does know where the bathrooms are and the break rooms. So he does know the buildings and the flow of things. So he's hit the ground running. We have met with the senior leadership at DEQ formally, and we'll be doing so again as we implement his presence here. So more on that later, but I did want to know who the guy is sitting on the side. And anybody got any questions? Or John, do you want to say anything? Judge Evans, do you want to say anything?
I'll hold off to the second part there.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, welcome. All right, we have 3 action items today. The first one is request approval. Okay, a press approval of the 30-day waiver and approval of the schedule for readoption of the periodic review of existing rules for 15A NCAC 02A. That's Dan Hirschman. Do I have that right? I feel like I'm reading the same thing I read yesterday, but maybe I am. Okay. All right. I was making sure I had the right agenda from the steering committee yesterday, so. We will need to do a 30-day waiver on this topic. You want to do that first? Okay. So this is, again, arriving at the schedule that has to be done for the A rules, and what we're trying to do is get the A rules lined up with the I rules. And so this is really just procedural stuff that we have to do with the RRC. What I've tried to do with all of these is tell the department based on their staff time and capabilities, if we're doing bucket lists or schedules, that we don't need to have this on separate meeting days. We can go back to back. But when we come back to do the actual rule development and the rules readoption, we will try to do the 30-day waiver every time, or not do a 30-day waiver, but do a 30-day waiver during this period. So to have a motion for a 30-day waiver to hear this item. Motion.
Mr. Chairman, so moved.
We have a second. Commissioner Baumgartner first. We have a second. Second, Commissioner Keen. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Okay, very good.
All right.
Counselor Hirschman, it's all yours.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dan Hirschman, DEQ General Counsel, and you already took care of the first request that we had, which is the 30-day waiver, so thank you. These rules that we are seeking approval for the schedule for readoption are part of the organizational rules for the Environmental Management Commission. There are 3 rules. There's a definition section. There are some specific delegations of authority, which are very outdated, by the way. They use words from several iterations ago of both this body and what is now DEQ. And then the 3rd rule is creation of the NPDES committee. All of these rules have been categorized as necessary. There was a comment period that ran from July 14th through September 22nd of 2025. No public comments were received. The RRC approved that characterization on December 2025. This is the basic proposed readoption schedule. Staff will complete drafting the rule amendments in the next few months through May of 2026. The steering committee approval of draft rule amendments would be in July, this coming July. The regulatory impact analysis, development, and OSBM approval would occur during the June to July of 2026 timeframe. The EMC would approve the RIA and draft rules to proceed to public comment in September of this year. The public comment period is proposed to run from roughly mid-October through mid-December of 2026. The staff would develop the hearing officer's report in January of 2027, and then the EMC would adopt the readoptions and the RIA in May of 2027. I will point out that the actual deadline for these rules is July 1st, 2027, but in order to meet that deadline, you would have to approve it at your May meeting of 2027. We have designed this readoption schedule to coincide, as Chairman Solomon said, with the O2I rules for convenience and efficiency. So DEQ recommends approval of the readoption schedule that I just laid out for 15A NCAC 02A to proceed to the RRC. Any questions?
Questions of staff? Or questions from the steering committee, which is me, I guess, so. Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion?
I'll repeat what I said yesterday. This rule in existence now, I don't think DEQ has had 3 name changes since and DWR as well. So I think it's high time we move this forward.
Second bullet, yeah.
So what?
Second bullet.
Yeah, I move that the commission approve the readoption schedule for 15A NCAC 02A as presented to proceed to the RRC.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Tweedy seconds. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Thank you,
Motion
Commissioners.
passes. All right. I think we have, Joelle's not here today, but we have Katie will make this presentation. This is the, did I just say that wrong? Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Hearing officers request and final adoption of regulatory impact analysis and proposed O2Q 114, 501, 507 pursuant to Session Law 2024-1.
Thank you.
We just had the wrong number on the agenda, the wrong name on the agenda. It's not that Joelle wasn't here. She just,
Yes.
or she didn't chicken out from doing a
No,
presentation.
I volunteered.
All right.
Really
Just
wanted
making
to.
sure, Joelle. I know you've done a few up here before, so.
So thank you. My name is Katie Quinlan. I'm with the Division of Air Quality in the planning section, and I'll be presenting the hearing officer's report for the proposed rules to incorporate the pre-permitting construction activity provisions of Session Law 2023-134 as amended by Session Law 2024-1. So these are just some acronyms for reference throughout the presentation. And I'll start with a little bit of background. So in Session Law 2023-134, which became effective on October 3rd, 2023, there was Section 12.11E, and that modified the air permitting provisions of General Statute 143-215.108A, and it specified changes that allow for the construction of sources prior to receipt of an air permit upon determination that an administratively complete application has been submitted to the Division of Air Quality. That session law language excludes some types of sources from utilizing those pre-permitting construction provisions, and I'll outline those on the next slide. But then in May of 2024, former Governor Cooper signed into effect some technical corrections to that State Budget Act, and that was in Session Law 2024-1, and specifically Section 4.13A added 2 new paragraphs to Session Law 2023-134, and those were added as Section 11 or 12.11 F and G, and that established a deadline for submittal of a state implementation plan or SIP revision to the US EPA that reflected those statutory changes and retroactively established the effective date of those provisions as contingent upon EPA approval of those provisions into the North Carolina SIP. So the session law language excludes some sources from utilizing these pre-permitting construction provisions, and that is if the source is subject to permit limits set pursuant to programs for prevention of significant deterioration, or PSD, or non-attainment new source review. Or if the source is subject to a residual risk-based hazardous air pollutant standard pursuant to Section 112F of the Clean Air Act, or a case-by-case maximum achievable control technology, or MAC standard issued by the division pursuant to Section 112J of the Clean Air Act. And so few sources are anticipated to be subject to those exclusions in the new pre-permitting construction provisions. So we expect that the majority of applicants for modifications of permits and for new permits for future new sources are expected to be eligible to opt to begin construction of the source upon their application being determined administratively complete if these provisions are approved into the SIP, rather than waiting until permit issuance. So to incorporate these provisions, the rulemaking includes the proposed adoption of 1 new rule and the amendment of 2 existing rules in subchapter 2Q. So we've proposed a new rule for adoption, that's Rule 2Q0114, titled Activities Allowed Prior to Permit Issuance, and that will implement the pre-permitting construction provisions of Session Law 2023-134, Section 12.11E. So as proposed, the new rule allows a permit applicant to begin construction, but not operation of an air contaminant source, equipment, or associated air cleaning or emission control devices before the permit is issued, provided that the application is deemed administratively complete. This allowance does not apply if the source is subject to any of, or in any of those excluded categories that I mentioned on the previous slide. And then we're also proposing amendments to rules 2Q 501 and 507. These are pretty minor and they're just to cross-reference the new rule that's proposed for adoption. So as I mentioned before, the proposed pre-permitting construction provisions are only effective contingent upon approval of those provisions into the North Carolina SIP by EPA. So in order to implement that, we've put that into the history note, in the effective portion of the history note for these rules. And so approximately 60 days after the EPA approves the changes, the amended rules will become effective. Specifically, pending on the first day of a month, that is 60 days after, the Secretary of DEQ certifies to the Revisor of Statutes that EPA has approved the rules into the SIP. The Secretary will provide notice of the and effective date on the DEQ website and by written or electronic notice to current holders of air permits issued by the department. And then the rule changes will apply on or after the resulting effective date. So I'll give a quick summary of the RIA, and then I'll go into the comments we received in those responses. So the RIA qualitatively characterized potential impacts to the private sector regulated community. Because of the nature of the proposed rule changes, there's no definitive quantifiable financial impact because the variables are market dependent and uncertain. But qualitatively, the RIA discussed some possible impacts. The most likely benefit that was identified is potential flexibility for an applicant to choose to begin construction upon their application being deemed administratively complete, rather than waiting until their permit is issued, which could potentially provide an applicant with the opportunity to begin operating their new or modified source sooner, still not before the permit's issued, but sooner if they were able to start and then end construction earlier. And so that could result in some time savings in overall project completion relative to waiting until permit issuance to begin construction. But we also noted that the proposal does not add any additional steps on the part of the applicant for the permit process. There's no change in permit fees or the emission standards that a facility must comply with. There were a number of uncertainties identified in this RIA, including whether and when the proposed rules might be approved by EPA into the North Carolina SIP, which, as we mentioned, is required before the provisions and proposed rules would become effective and implemented, and therefore when any of these possible impacts might actually be realized by applicants. There's uncertainty as to how many applicants might choose to utilize these proposed provisions due to the potential for third-party citizen suits and the financial risk of constructing a source that has not been thoroughly reviewed by the division. And there's uncertainty as to how much time might actually be saved in the overall project timeline, particularly with respect to other pending rule revisions that impact permit modification review timelines that are also before EPA for approval. So there was no quantifiable costs or benefits to state or local governments, the general public, or the environment identified as a result of this rulemaking. The RIA was approved by the Office of State Budget and Management on April 27th of last year. Subsequently, we updated it to discuss some of those additional uncertainties that we talked about in the last couple slides that were noted by members of the Air Quality Committee at the May meeting. And then the amended RIA was reapproved by OSBM on June 19th of last year. So we held a public comment period on these proposed rules from October 15th through December 31st of 2025. There was a public hearing held on December 2nd. That was in hybrid format, so both at our Raleigh office as well as online. The hearing officer was Commissioner Wright, and we received one set of comments, and that was from the Southern Environmental Law Center on behalf of 7 Directions of Service, Appalachian Voices, Clean Air North Carolina Conservation Network, the Sierra Club, and the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. So I'll provide an overview of the comments contained in that letter and our responses. So the commenters stated that the proposed provisions cannot be incorporated into the North Carolina SIP because they're inconsistent with Clean Air Act Section 110A2C and the federal implementing regulations, specifically at 40 CFR 51.160. And they would interfere with the state's ability to maintain compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. The proposed provisions, the commenter stated the proposed provisions would remove the means by which the DEQ can prevent construction of a source that would interfere with NAAQS compliance, which is required for every SIP. So as the commenters noted, the DEQ also acknowledged in the RIA that there may be inconsistencies between provisions of the Clean Air Act, specifically Section 110A2C, the federal implementing regulations, and EPA historical policy on constructing emission sources with respect to these proposed statutory provisions. And these inconsistencies create uncertainty as to whether the EPA will approve the rules into the SIP, which is required before the rules become effective. And this uncertainty of approvability leads to additional uncertainties that we described in the RIA, such as potential risks to facilities that opt to avail themselves of these pre-permitting provisions, both financially and with respect to citizen suits. So the commenters also stated that the proposed provisions cannot be incorporated into the North Carolina SIP because they would interfere with the state's ability to achieve reasonable further progress in a non-attainment area. They projected that the Charlotte metropolitan area would soon be designated as non-attainment for the primary annual PM 2.5 NAAQS, which was revised in 2024, without an exceptional events demonstration, and that this rulemaking could interfere with subsequent requirements that would come into play if that non-attainment designation were made. And so we responded that North Carolina does not currently have any non-attainment areas. The DEQ recommended that all 100 counties in North Carolina be designated as attainment for that 2024 revised PM 2.5 annual primary NAAQS. And we provided that along with a supporting exceptional events demonstration. We're currently awaiting EPA's decision on next steps for that. We did note that the DEQ did not receive a 120-day letter from EPA, which is what would have indicated if EPA intended to modify North Carolina's designation recommendation of attainment to non-attainment for any area of the state. So the commenters also stated that the legislative provisions would interfere with DEQ's ability to enforce other applicable requirements under the Clean Air Act due to ambiguity in the language excluding sources subject to PSD and non-attainment new source review, stating that it is not sufficiently clear in excluding major sources and major modifications. We responded that the proposed applicability language in proposed Rule 2Q0114 is consistent with the language in General Statute 143-215.108A, and it is applicable to major sources and major modifications in the specified categories. Commenters also expressed concern that there could be some financial risks to the applicant and the state if major sources or major modifications are initially mischaracterized as minor sources or minor modifications and are mistakenly allowed to start construction without a permit. So we noted that if an entity chooses to start construction of an emission source upon determination that their application is administratively complete, they do so at their own risk. There is no guarantee that the entity will be issued a permit, and they could potentially be opening themselves up to third-party citizen suits, as we acknowledged in the RIA for this rulemaking. So next, the commenters expressed concern that the proposed rulemaking could be used in conjunction with the EPA's project emissions accounting rule to allow large facilities to be fully constructed without a permit. And so we noted that proposed Rule 2Q0114 implements General Statute 143-215.108A B15, which dictates the categories excluded from being able to start construction upon determination that their permit application is administratively complete. So if a source is not in the listed categories, it is not excluded, but DEQ's technical review of the permit application will not be affected by whether the source is constructed, and even full construction of a facility will not guarantee permit issuance. And this is reinforced by a couple of our rules, specifically 2Q308 and 518 specified that a permit cannot be issued unless it meets all of the requirements and procedures, and also specifies that a permit application may be denied if needed to implement General Statute 143, Article 21B, or the Federal Clean Air Act. We also noted that while the exact interaction and layering between these proposed rules and other state and federal policies and rules is yet to be seen, it is important to note that the proposed pre-permitting provisions do not supersede any federal requirements related to the PSD program or its applicability. And then finally, due to the reasons that they stated in their letter, the commenters urged the department to pause the rulemaking and work with the General Assembly to amend General Statute 143-215.108A as needed to realign state law with the Federal Clean Air Act. And the division noted that request from the commenters and is providing the EMC with those identified concerns. So I've got a timeline here. We are here in March with potential adoption by the EMC, and then following the rest of the rulemaking process from there, as noted, the rule amendments would not become effective until after approval by EPA. And so we have a recommendation on the slide as provided by the hearing officer. And the hearing officer recommends that the proposed adoption of 15A and CAC 02Q 0114 and amendments to 15A and CAC 02Q 0501 and 507 as identified in Chapter 2 of the hearing officer's report, the final regulatory impact analysis as presented in Chapter 6 of the hearing report, and the hearing officer's report be adopted by the Environmental Management Commission. And with that, I can take any questions.
Right. Any comments or you want to take questions? Cool.
You take questions first. That's fine. I'll be glad to.
Any
glad to
statement you want to
entertain
make
questions.
in everything?
Sure, I can make a statement. Obviously, this is a complicated rule, and it's my understanding it has, it's been considered at least on the table for, it predates, my seat on the commission. So I understand that, and it has a lengthy history. There are a couple of things going on here. We have a legislative directive to adopt a rule. We also have a contingency for effectiveness, that is contingent on EPA's approval. That being said, this rule, it does not prohibit construction, but any construction prior to permit issuance would also be at risk of owners or constructors. So we need to be mindful of that as we consider this rule. That yes, there are a couple of things going on here. One, the legislative directive, but two, I can't say that we're willfully doing anything that that would harm the environment. However, again, this is contingent on EPA's approval. So with this impasse at hand, we just need to really consider what we're moving forward with here.
Question, how many comments did you get total?
One written response that contained several comments, and those were summarized in Katie's
all of these
presentation.
are here.
Yes.
So this was anybody from the regulated community for or against this in the comments or public hearing?
No, we just received the one comment letter that I outlined in the slides.
And then I understood, I wasn't aware of this, but I think y'all extended the comment period
We did.
for an additional 30 days? Because you didn't get any comments from the public hearing or up until the deadline?
It was an additional 2 weeks. It was originally going to expire on, it was, no, I don't have that date. It was, I think it was going to expire mid-December, and we extended it to the end of December 2025.
That's correct. It was
And when did this
originally
one
until
come in?
December.
When did
15th.
this comment come in?
It came in, I believe it was after the original expiration of the original comment period, so after December 15th.
I believe that's right.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
I wouldn't need, actually, I can confirm that. That is correct, yes, after December 15th.
Okay.
And December 19th is
I
the date
see,
of the
I
letter.
see several hands going up. I will, in this staff conversation, we've got, Ellie's looked at some of this for me. Our new executive director, John Evans, has looked at this. Judge, we may get you up here if we have detailed questions too. Katie's here and the staff's here. Let me say, as we go into these questions, this has been one that's been on, you can see the 2024, we're in 2026 now. So this is more than 2 years old, probably 2.5 or 3 years old. And I think what we have done is through a lot of hard work, we've figured out a way to kind of, everything I've been told is we're 90% certain this rule passes muster. And I believe the department is not opposed to it. So I think we're answering a legislative mandate with this. And I'll leave it for questions. Commissioner Bailey, I think you were first.
Thank you. This is just a question out of curiosity. Is there a notice required? Is the permit applicant required to notify the division when they begin construction?
These provisions do not require, they let the division or the department know that they're beginning construction before their permit is issued. Of course, they have to file their application and it has to be deemed administratively complete, but they don't have to, under these provisions, notify us that they are starting construction before their permit's issued.
Commissioner Chmielewski, I know you've been coming out of your seat, so go ahead. She just had you first.
Yeah, no rush. I'm respectful of the fact that there's a history with this, so, but I'm bothered by two things. So we have a legislative mandate and we have concerns that it's in contradiction to the Clean Air Act. And I'd like to hear from the department how you feel that this is not in contradiction with the Clean Air Act if the Clean Air Act, at least my reading of the CFR 4051.160 says such procedures must include means by which the state or local agency responsible for final decision-making on an application for approval to construct or modify will prevent such construction or modification if it will result in a violation of portions of the control strategy. So it seems to me that this would really put the department in a difficult situation, and I'd like to hear from you. And then I had one other concern.
Okay. I think I'm going to have Mike speak to that. That's okay.
Division, sorry.
Mike Ebrzezinskis, Director, Division of Air Quality. Thank you for the question. So I think a couple of points, because I think a number of folks, as the chair mentioned, this had a little bit of a long history. We've briefed the committee, Air Quality Committee, several times on this. So it may be useful to just tick through a few points that were discussed in committee for the benefit of those that weren't on the commission at that time. I will note that the department and the division isn't expressing any position on the hearing officer's recommendation, but I think a few of these key points are important to help you all make an informed decision on this. And I think a number of them were covered in Katie's presentation. A number of these were covered in Air Quality Committee meetings previously. But I think that the first key point to get to your question is to look at the concerns about the provision conflicting with Section 110A2C of the Clean Air Act and the federal implementing regulations in 40 CFR 51.160. So let's look at the language in the Clean Air Act first. That language states that every SIP must include regulation of the, quote, regulation of the modification and construction of any stationary source within the areas covered by the plan as necessary to assure that the national ambient air quality standards are achieved. End quote. So then the federal implementing regulations at 40 CFR 51.160A requires every state implementation plan or SIP to include, quote, legally enforceable procedures that enable the state or local agency to determine whether construction or modification of a facility, building, structure, or installation or combination of those things will result in a violation of the applicable portions of a control strategy or interference with attainment or maintenance of a national standard in the state in which the proposed source or modification is located or in a neighboring state, end quote. And then that next paragraph in 40 CFR 51.160B requires the language I think you were mentioning a moment ago, which says that every state implementation plan or SIP must contain, quote, means by which the state or local agency responsible for final decision-making on a permit application for approval to construct or modify will prevent such construction or modification if it will interfere with attainment or maintenance of a national standard, end quote. So the rule language that's before you here today from the session law would allow construction of an air emission source so long as the permit applicant submits an administratively complete application to the division. And at that point in the permitting process, we would not yet know whether the project would interfere with attainment or maintenance of a standard. Therefore, I think the division doesn't really know how we would comply with federal rule language that says there must be a means by which we must prevent construction if it'll interfere with attainment or maintenance of a standard if the construction is already underway for the project that we've not yet fully analyzed. So again, if the state's program fails to meet those requirements, EPA has authority to intervene, as do third parties to enforce those procedures. It's noteworthy, you asked about who commented and when. EPA did not comment during the comment period. However, the reason the comment period was extended was because EPA requested the comment period be extended due to the shutdown and the fact that the comment period kind of straddled the holiday season. So that was the reason why the comment period was extended, but they still didn't submit a comment letter. So that's just for full transparency there. And then finally, I think while EPA did not comment during the comment period, EPA had weighed in on this previously, and this was discussed at the November 2024 Air Quality Committee meeting, where they submitted a comment letter to the division in September 2024, and that's on the record of the September 2024 Air Quality Committee meeting. Final note, because just while I'm here, I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but just so you all have all the information to inform your decision-making here today, I think it's also interesting to note something that's happened more recently in September of 2025. EPA released under the current administration some guidance with regard to the concept of begin actual construction there, suggested that it's not okay to proceed with construction of an air emission source prior to getting a permit. And so they had every opportunity in that clarification and that guidance from the current administration to kind of speak to the provisions that I just discussed here today, but they did not. And so that's the long answer to a difficult question, and helps, I think, kind of lay some of the groundwork from the past meetings for those of you that are new to the commission.
Smith, you were next, I think, over there. Or do you have one now?
Commissioner Gibson may have
Commissioner
been.
Gibson?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, I think, is that this state law is a violation of a federal law. And so if we approve this, then we'd be supporting a violation of federal law. But it seems like maybe what's driving this is the need for industry to have speedier review of their permit applications for new sources or source modifications. And it doesn't seem to me like this is a good way to achieve it, because the industry could begin construction and then it could be determined that they have to completely redo their facility, and so that's a tremendous risk for them. I don't know why anybody would take it. And a better solution would be to make sure there's enough staff at DEQ for a timely review of these applications. And I'm just wondering, do you currently have adequate staff to provide that timely review?
Answer B first, and I'll give you B first, and I'll give Ellie A, okay? I'll give Counselor A on the legal aspects.
So do we have adequate staff? We have over 25 vacancies across our division. We have over 340 permit applications in-house currently. I will note that with regard to timeliness, there were other provisions in the same session law, the budget bill in 2023, that changed the permitting timelines for certain permit actions that our division undertakes. The commission has already approved those rules, and those rules have already been submitted to EPA for review and approval into the SIP. But they have not yet. So that kind of addresses, I think, both aspects of that question.
So you don't have enough staff right now because there's a lot of vacancies. Yeah.
There's a lot of vacancies, but let's be honest. Didn't the General Assembly give you some more money in 2023 or 2024 for air quality positions at one point? They gave the department some. I'm not sure if they did the Title V or not, what year that was.
No, sir, not for additional positions. The only additional funding that the Division of Air Quality received several years ago was to support the PFAS work of the department, and that was about $700,000 of general fund appropriations, which represents the only general fund appropriations that our division gets. That's less than 3% of our total budget.
And I may have that messed up with the water world with some of the permitting over there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Question A on the legality.
Yeah. So I've been looking at this for quite some time, and in all candor, I had many debates with former Commissioner Carter over this, but here's where I think we land. 40 CFR 151.160B is a conditional. So the regulation in the federal regulation says that we cannot allow pre-permitting construction if it will result in the applicable portions of the control strategy being violated, or if it will interfere with attainment or maintenance of a national standard. Because this rule does not allow operation without a permit, there's not going to be a violation based on the construction, and that is based on the if provision of 40 CFR 51.160. Now, what I'll say is, again, I went back and forth on this, but there are other states that have approved SIP programs that have regulations like this. So I think we're not out of line with other regional or with other states that have a similar program. And I don't have them at my fingertips, but I do think that there is room within the federal law to allow this regulation to move forward. We do need to wait for EPA's approval on this.
Can you comment on that? Because you talked about the implementation was something.
Sure,
earlier.
yeah. So a nuance of this, another complicating feature of this, these rule changes are based on an amendment to statute that will not be effective until EPA approves the SIP. So our rules based on this to be amended statute cannot be effective until EPA amends the SIP. So we are promulgating rules with an effective date to be determined. So essentially, we will send these rules to EPA, say, we are hoping to have these entered into the North Carolina Administrative Code. However, they will not go into effect unless EPA says these are okay with the Clean Air Act. Which would be, it'd be 60 days after the EPA.
Yeah, what's on the slide? Yes.
Mr. Jaspers, you have one before?
No, go.
Well, I'm trying to go back and forth, so let the chair
Commissioner
control
Smith.
the flow here.
Oh, so what I'm trying to understand is, reading all of this, and I understand there's a long history here. And I saw that there was no comment from potential beneficiaries, users of this rulemaking. Is that correct? So there was no.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. So what is the anticipated, use of this rulemaking? I'm not seeing that the industry is jumping at this because they're afraid, and rightfully so, that this may not be, going into effect or maybe reversed or whatever. So is this actually a lot of discussion on something that may not be used by, potential construction?
Very good question, and one that was also asked previously in committee. And we noted at that time that we have no idea who and how many, and that was acknowledged in the regulatory impact analysis.
Exactly.
With the methodology. However, there was a period between when the initial session law went into effect in the 2023 budget bill. So session law 2023-134, the actual language that we're talking about today was actually law for a period until session law 2024-1 made it conditionally effective, as we've discussed already here today. So there was a couple months span there where it was law. And we're not aware of anyone,
Exactly.
Again, we're not aware of anyone that took advantage of those. We had a few curious consultants and we just said, contact your legal counsel and proceed at your own risk. This is what the law says. So just gave them the facts. But we're not aware that anyone proceeded with taking advantage of this provision during those couple months that it actually was law.
Commissioner Smith, back to you on the list, the right side, or my right side.
So, a couple of things. One of these I've got one quick question for council, but I also have a question for Mr. Abrazinskis. The question for council is, several people have said, we have a mandate to adopt these rules. But my reading of the session law is that it never required this commission to adopt rules. There is no mandate. The legislature amended the statute. And after being told that likely the provision was inconsistent with the Clean Air Act, came back the following year and basically stayed the effectiveness of the statute change and directed the department to go to EPA to request approval of a SIP amendment. Nowhere in there is there a requirement that this commission adopt rules. So for council, is that your reading of the session law?
Yeah, I think that's right. There's not a mandate that the EMC adopt these rules. that said a change in the statute, if the statute changes, our rules are inconsistent with the statute. So that's factor number one. Factor number two is that generally speaking, SIPs are amended via rule changes. They cannot be amended via just statute because SIP amendments have to go through a notice and comment period. Statutes can be changed without any notice or comment whatsoever. So generally speaking, we amend our SIPs through rulemaking. So in order to comply with the SIP process and to ensure that our rules are consistent with state law, if and when EPA okays this, we went ahead and moved forward with rulemaking so that our rules are in line with statute if and when this is approved by EPA. Is there a direct mandate in the session law for us to adopt these rules? There is not.
So one follow-up on that. We've had the discussion about, yes, about EPA's insistence that legislation cannot be part of the SIP. I don't agree with that position, but nevertheless, whatever. But a follow-up question for council is typically, as I understand state administrative law, this commission has to have statutory authority to adopt a rule at the time the rule is adopted. This session law is not in effect. It won't be in effect until there's a SIP amendment. So I think there are real questions about whether this commission even has authority to adopt a rule. There's certainly no mandate. I think there's a question about whether there's authority because the session law is not in effect and it won't be when we take this action or for however long after we take this action. So that is what it is. But I do have one question for Mr.
Wait a minute.
Aberzinskis.
Was that a question or was that a
That was a
statement?
question, yes, I guess.
Yeah. So I saw that coming as well, and we actually ended up doing a pre-review with the RRC council on this rule, in part because of the authority issue. It's not unprecedented for agencies to move forward with rulemaking prior to a statute being effective. What we would do is simply put in the rule, this rule is not effective until EPA approves the SIP amendment. So there would be a delayed effective date, which is allowable under the APA.
That's an unusual situation, but I did have a
Yes.
question for Mr. Aberzinskis.
Okay, third question, go ahead.
Which is just to clarify the gap between this session law and the Clean Air Act and Clean Air Act regulations. As I understand it, this session law waives any pre-construction review for a category of projects that require pre-construction review under the new source review regulations. Is that correct?
Yes, so this would allow for construction to proceed for like minor new source review projects, which is the larger part of our permitting portfolio. PSD, major source, NSR are an exception as noted in the presentation to this language in the session law.
So I think that's one thing that needs to be clear is that although the session law excludes two categories of potential projects that require new source review, there is a third category, and that's where the rub is. There's a third category that under the Clean Air Act and federal rules also requires prior review for construction. That's the conflict. And I'll also say, and this gets a little skipped over in some of the materials, but the comment that Mr. Aberzinskis referred to that EPA provided in the fall of 2024 was to decline the request of the department to start parallel processing of a SIP amendment for this change. EPA has not changed that position. If EPA has accepted anything parallel to this in other states, it would be interesting to see it, but nothing they have said with respect to this indicates they will approve this as a SIP amendment.
Okay, Commissioner Hardison, I think you were next from the very beginning. You've been patient.
I have some comments and some questions. I'm trying to remember. So in this category of permit applications that could be impacted by this rule, when we're reviewing them now, when DAQ is reviewing them now, with the this is is in reference to the concern of potential violations of the Clean Air Act. Is DAQ with the application now assessing emissions from the construction or only assessing emissions from the operation? That's interesting.
Right. So the question is, the answer is the construction emissions are not for these minor source NSR. Those are not part of the analysis process. And that's not really what the federal laws or rules speak to either. It's never been about the emissions. It's really about, all right, what are the procedures that we have to follow in processing permits?
But that's my point.
Yes.
If it just to, I guess, provide support for your opinion on that, that there's not a conflict in assessing if a permit application is complete, the application is for the operation of the source. It's not for the emissions of the construction. So then to deem it complete and allow the construction in advance would not impact potential emissions of the operation or be in conflict of that, is how I'm understanding that. Okay. So a second thought, how is this rule different or similar to, I'm remembering a Part 1 and a Part 2 application process now that allows construction now with certain kinds of applications. And there's, excuse me, a notification that has to be made publicly if you're going to construct before operation. So how is this potential rule different from what currently exists for a Part 1 and a Part 2 application, which I think I remember does allow construction before operation?
Okay, so to the prior point, the analysis that we are undertaking isn't related to emissions from construction. It's related to an analysis of the operation of what they've applied for. And so making sure that that technical analysis ensures that they are complying with the applicable rules, federal and state, that are designed to protect public health and the national standards. And
Which
so
would
that's
have to be in place to operate. They would have to apply, they would have to comply to operate.
Absolutely. So just to clarify, there's not an analysis of construction emissions. It's an analysis of the project. The second part of the question, I'm not sure, I'm a little confused, and maybe you could help me. Are you talking about the notice of intent to construct provisions in the statute that have been there for quite some time? By the way, those are very seldomly used. Or are you talking about or asking about Part 1, Part 2, Title V application processes?
Yes, to that.
The latter?
I guess it's two questions. Yes, to that. And the Title V's may be exempt or are not included in this particular rule. Is that, could they take advantage of this rule?
They would be impacted by this rule,
Okay.
Especially the Part 1s, which are issued under our state permitting program. So yes, that would be part of this. The only applications that are exempt from this option that's before you are major source NSR projects. That would be PSD, prevention of significant deterioration. We get 3 to 10 of those applications per year. So that's, like I said, a small portfolio of our overall permitting workload. And then also very seldomly used MACT, case-by-case MACT applications. There are so few of those that average less than one a year. I can't remember the last time that we had one. Mark's shaking his head. Yes, it's been a long time. So the exemptions apply to a very, very small part of our permitting portfolio.
So the Part 1 and Part 2 applications that Title V sources sometimes take advantage of now, does that allow constructions? Does Part 1 allow construction prior to operation? And then a year later you submit?
Yes.
Yes, but after a permit is issued, it allows construction.
And then you submit a year later, the Part 2.
It's a construction and operation permit under Part 1, and Part 2 is just to follow up with the Title V application later, which many times that permit just mirrors the original permit that was issued, those would be eligible under this provision, to use this provision if it
But
became law.
To Commissioner Gibson's point, does the Part 1 and the Part 2 help facilitate a more speedy timeline for the applicant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've had that built into our permitting structure for Title V for some time, and that's the pathway that most people go. It's a 90-day clock for the Part 1 for a Title V facility. That's pretty damn reasonable for a Title V permit. So, yeah, that's, I think, absolutely something and then there are other provisions as well that those that became before us, and we structured the program, and the rules that apply to Title V allow for certain minor modifications without a permit. And so there's other relief valves for little minor things as well. You don't have to go through the full longer process.
I'd just like to add again, when we're considering the risk potentially posed by this rule from the regulated community, the risk is largely for the applicant. It's completely all on the applicant. When you have to put capital up front, you have to allocate capital, you have to schedule project, you have to secure contractors, you have to stabilize pricing for materials that may change, but you want to enter into a contract to get them before steel goes up or whatever goes up. All those things play into it. If you're waiting for an air permit and then you don't get your contractor, your prices go up, your company changes, all those are risks that the company takes on. So to have this ability to construct, knowing that you're going to take those risks on and that you may not get a permit to operate or it has to sit there, is all on the applicant and little to no risk to the environment, if any. And the safeguard is that it is now been mandated for us that be written into our SIP. So the EPA's got to approve it. So the bottom line is when we write this into our SIP and submit it, if they don't approve it, then it doesn't occur.
That's right. It's a good summary. And I'll be honest, when I went through this and all the complexity of the last couple of years and being part of this, it's kind of, the APA requires that we, in our rulemaking, ease the burden on the regulated community. And this is a tool they could use. How many will actually use it? I'm not sure. And I don't know if it'll ever get to the finish line, if it's get through EPA. But it does ease that burden for the big companies or the special projects that might need it. And I'm just saying, from my perspective, that's one of the things I've come down on this thing is it is a tool in the toolbox if we get it approved. Do you agree with that?
Mr. Chairman?
Wait a minute, I'm having a conversation. I'm asking a question. Do you agree? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And it could even provide some relief for DAQ in that some projects could proceed. I'm just remembering how difficult it can be sometimes for more complicated permits also to meet a timeline that your company's tried to put forth to meet a schedule with all the things that are in play, and then working the permit issues that need to be worked. So it's possible that gives some relief to DAQ because you're still got to come back on your timeline to give the permit to operate.
Okay. Commissioner Smith, yes.
So I'm getting a little confused whether we're doing questions or actually debating a motion. But a follow-up question to follow up on the recent conversation about the two different permitting decisions. Make sure I'm understanding this correctly in terms of how this pre-construction review relates to the operating permit. My understanding is new source review rules require the department to determine for a new source or a modification of a source that when it's constructed, it will be able to meet national ambient air quality standards. So that pre-construction review is about making the initial determination as to whether when it is completed and in operation, it will be able to meet air quality standards. The Title V operating permit, if one is required, comes later and that fine tunes. And as Mr. Abrzynskas said, that often looks very much like the pre-construction review. But the pre-construction review is all about determining whether whether the project when constructed will meet the air quality standards. Is that a fair
Yes, ma'am.
description?
That's what the federal rule requires, and that is what we do currently.
And one follow-up question to that, which is, this statute ties the ability to go forward with construction to determination that the application is complete. So at the point, I've looked online at the division's information for permit applicants, what you have to submit. Now, at the time someone submits an application, you're determining if that application is complete. Are you analyzing the correctness of their numbers or whether those numbers lead to a conclusion that it will meet air quality standards?
No, ma'am, not at that step. The definition of administratively complete was also part of this same session law. And it says, the term administratively complete means all information required by statute, regulation, or application form has been submitted to the department for the purpose of processing the permit application. So yeah, and we're checking to see if the fees paid or the forms there. We have not yet done a technical analysis at that stage of review.
I want to clarify one thing earlier, and I don't know if Commissioner Smith, you said it, or Director Abraziska said it, but we did do this, and I'll let Ellie read it, but we did look at that letter from November of 2024 previously. And it doesn't say, I don't think one of y'all said it was did somebody say it was a violation of Clean Air Act, the parallel processing?
No.
Okay.
No,
it's
I
not,
believe what I
I've got-
said was that they declined to begin the parallel processing because of the concerns about consistency with Clean Air Act
I don't
regulations.
even think they said that, but maybe they did, but depends on how you read this.
I mean, they said they wouldn't proceed with parallel processing due to the complex nature of the changes and concerns outlined in the comments. And the concerns were consistency with the Clean Air Act.
Right. So we have to take it to them to test that.
Right.
And that's just what it is. Commissioner Chemetsky, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Just one other comment that I think we should consider. But first, I want to say, I think that Commissioner Gibson made a really important point, that if we could get speedier review of permits, this could be a win-win, get more resources for the department. But one other thing that bothers me is we talked yesterday about the newspaper versus e-permitting for air permit notifications, and is when communities would find out about a pollution source being built. And my understanding is that's not formal notification is not done until there's a draft permit. Is that correct?
From the applicant standpoint, we have to notify 15 days before we submit an application. And because if you're in a place of no zoning, that involves a sign on the road and notifications in the newspaper. So our public notice goes out long before the state's public notice goes out.
And I'd just like clarification.
Yes, so that's correct for areas with no zoning, Commissioner Hardison, that's correct. And Commissioner Chemetsky, that's also correct, that it'd be at the point of a draft product, a permit and permit review document being available for public inspection, that the public is notified of that product of the divisions being available for review. However, at the point of the division determining that an application is administratively complete, then that application gets pushed out to our website. And so those that are most interested have the ability to check and see, but the division isn't pushing out notifications to broad groups at the moment that we get an administratively complete application. We do not do that.
Right. And so I hear that you're not allowing emission of pollutants from the source, from the industrial source, but there are environmental impacts when you construct an industrial source. So you're cutting down trees, you're having trucks coming in, you're potentially impairing nearby water bodies. So
all that's permitted though, just in discussion, all that's got to be permitted too. So that would be done illegally.
And those permits
benign for
require
the
public
community.
notice.
Okay. All right. A couple more questions. I'll take a motion.
Just
Jasper.
one quick question for clarification. When I'm listening to this and reading everything, this looks to me like the cart is before the horse, because all this rulemaking really requires input from EPA. And until we have that, I feel like the rulemaking, we can make this, but we really need to hear from EPA. Am I hearing this correctly? Because if EPA says this is not what they want, then all of this becomes useless.
EPA may provide comments during comment periods, but they will not react in writing to the rule until we send an official rule to them. So it's not, the card is this. The card is that we go through a public process locally and we adopt the rule and then the EPA rules on the rule. They can have comments up until that point, but the cart is not before the horse. This is the horse.
EPA has reviewed this concept, but has not provided feedback as to where they're standing on this. Is that correct?
They have not provided comment during this comment period or even after the comment period. And I let them know that we would gladly accept a comment letter late because I think you all would have been interested to hear what they had to say during as you're contemplating this decision. So we've not received an official comment letter from them on this, other than what has been discussed back in September 2024. And again, we understand some of the frustrations here. We had discussions in committee about this, about let's try to get an early read so we can avoid this, but we are where we are, but we've not received any official comment from EPA during the comment period or since the comment period has closed.
And not to lose that, we've also went for a preliminary opinion from RRC too, anticipating this.
I mean,
So there's no blockers here.
That
if we wanna
really,
do it,
that
if we
really,
don't want to do it.
no, I understand. So, but that really worries me is that we're sort of potentially moving forward on rulemaking that, may not be viewed as consistent with, EPA, let's say in a couple of weeks. That really worries me.
Okay. And I think that's a legitimate concern for all commissioners, but I will just tell you guys, on all our rulemaking, we will not know for sure, no matter how much we love it or hate it, till we actually put it in front of the RRC, the General Assembly, and the EPA. That's just how rulemaking works. We know that, I think. Commissioner Tweedy, last question.
Two questions. One, I think for council, maybe not. Are we aware of other states that allow this?
Yeah.
There are other states that allow construction prior to issuance of a permit.
There are, I believe Illinois is one, and I'm gonna look to Judge Evans on this. What other states?
Yeah, you need to go to the microphone if you're going to speak. I didn't want to get you, but do you know?
I would love to get those citations because we asked EPA this very question and they said that they were not aware of any.
Judge Evans just asked you to restrict your comments. We're about to make a motion, but if you have the states
Yes,
or
sir.
know how many there are, please.
Yes,
tell
sir.
me.
I've got Wisconsin, Indiana, Missouri, and Texas. Now, Indiana is not SIP approved. The other three are. Oklahoma has one that's almost SIP approved, is proposed for approval in December 25. And all of it, and I also have the benefit of actually having done that as a consultant in at least three of those states. And so they'd have the exact same provision. And in the comment period, they discussed 160.
Okay, very good.
Is there
All
any,
right. Mr. Tweedy, follow-on question?
well, I have a follow-on to that. Any nuance we should understand about that, about how other states are doing that? They were doing something a little different. Sorry, I didn't. I know, I don't want to spiral this, but I think it's an important point.
Mike, Mike doesn't know. Judge Evans, Mike, do you know? Judge Evans, do you know who?
I have the same question as Commissioner Tweedy.
Is there any nuance to that we should understand?
Yes, they're not all exactly the same.
Okay.
Some require an application be submitted as ours does. Some require a draft permit. They're different stages, but the concept that 51-160 prohibits construction prior to a permit, that's the issue and they all struggled with it, to be quite honestly. I'll make one more point. The reason that I know about these other states, and the reason it's important, we ask questions like this all the time, like we did yesterday at committee on the dam safety. What are other states doing? There's an actual regulation the EPA must follow. They must be nationally consistent. It's required. And those other states are in other EPA regions that have approved almost similar programs. So when it goes to EPA Region 4, I'm sure they'll be made aware that other regions have already approved similar programs, and they are, in fact, required by law. There's a 2014 DC Circuit case, Summit Petroleum, that made that clear to the EPA. So again, it's interesting from an academic standpoint who's similar, but it may even be more important from a legal standpoint.
Okay.
One follow-up question?
Yes, no, well, go ahead. Is it for
So did I
Judge?
understand you to say a minute ago that two of the states you mentioned are not, one is not SIP approved?
One.
The other has a provision that's pending that has not yet been SIP approved?
No, that would be five. I apologize. I gave you four. I got Wisconsin, Indiana, Missouri, and Texas. That's four. Indiana is the one I know is not state approved. The other ones are are SIP approved, and Oklahoma, the fifth state, is proposed to be approved. EPA has proposed to approve it.
So, Mr. Chairman, it seems like this is a good reason to delay action on this. I think the fine points make a big difference in terms of how those other states are writing their regulations and whether it's consistent with the SIP or not. I mean, right now, what we have in the record of this proposal is a letter from EPA declining to do parallel processing of a SIP amendment, but and citing the inconsistencies with the federal rule. So if there are models out there that get closer to being consistent with the federal rule, it'd be good to see that before we move forward. Otherwise, we've got some small number of states who are doing something and we don't know quite what, and some of them have been approved and some of them have not.
Right. And I think that's a matter of opinion for this commission to decide by majority vote. I'm going to go to the hearing officer now for any comment or your motion. Mr. Hearing Officer, entertain your motion.
I'll make a motion. Make a motion for proposed adoption of 15A NCAC 02Q 0114 and amendments to 15A NCAC 02Q 0501 and 0507 as presented in Chapter 2 of the hearing report, and the final RIA analysis as presented in Chapter 6 of this hearing report, and the hearing officer's report be adopted by the EMC.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. Ellison, seconds. Now discussion on the motion. Mr. Ellison.
A couple comments from, I'm not sure if it was questions or discussion on the motion, but in any case, the question of who's going to use this. And the users or potential users did not comment during the public comment period. I would suggest, for better or worse, that the way legislation happens in the state of North Carolina and the rest of the world, that the users or potential users made their preferences clear to the legislature. As Commissioner Hardison brought up, there's a lot of risk in developing a facility that needs major air quality permitting. There's a lot of money involved, and perhaps and you know, the cart before the horse, I would suggest this rule kind of greases the skids so that if and when EPA does approve, we're ready to roll, and it can promptly be implemented, and that stops the back and forth. That's why the timeline of this rulemaking has some value to potential users. Potential users may be looking at the cost of their project, the financing of their project, where time is money. And if you're building a major industrial facility and need big air quality permits, there's a lot of money going into that facility, especially if it's what you call it, green, initial construction with land clearing and all that, which requires lots of other permits and public notification. I've worked on projects where the whole financing was dependent on various permitting milestones, and that's important. We have a lot of economic development programs in the state of North Carolina that are publicly funded, and a lot of these grants are tied to certain milestones to keep the money flowing to fund the projects that are going to benefit our economy. So this is not putting the cart before the horse. This is greasing the skids so that if and when we get the EPA approval, the process will then be in place for private financing of private projects, projects with public financing, and other interested parties can expedite completion of their projects.
Mr. Smith?
So I'm going to vote against the motion. I think the most the commission could do at this point is, or should do at this point, is postpone any action on this to get more information, certainly on what EPA has approved, because I'm not hearing anything specific enough to overcome the fact that we've already been told EPA finds this provision to be inconsistent. The other thing I want to address is the notion that there's no risk in allowing someone to build something expensive except to them. And I just think that is not the case at all. We know how politics works. The reason we require pre-construction permitting on many environmental projects is you don't want to get to the point where you have an applicant who has spent however many $1 million standing in front of you, unable to get a permit for that facility, because that conversation doesn't end there. So it is not just a risk to the applicant. It will be a risk to the program and to the state when that applicant goes to the legislature or puts pressure on the DAQ director because they have those sunk costs in something that we could not review to determine whether it would be consistent with the law or not. And that's just a reality. We don't do environmental permitting this way, and there's a really good reason we don't. Because you don't want to have multi-million-dollar facilities that can't meet environmental regulations already constructed and standing there with an applicant saying, I've already sunk these costs.
Your comments are?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, you've commented once. Let me go to you again to respond to that because you did start this a little bit. So let's go back. It is a question of private risk, and go ahead.
And Commissioner Smith, can you point to a single example of what you just described where a developer or someone made a big project before they had their permits, and then they didn't get their permit or something didn't go their way, and then they went back to the legislature and the process that you suggested?
Well, we certainly have many examples of developers or industries going to the legislature for changes. So that list is long. But I will say the reason you don't see that happening so much is none of our programs work this way. We don't let people build big things without a pre-construction permit review, not under air quality, not under water quality. That's not the way permitting programs work.
Excuse me, can you point to a single example?
Of what?
Of someone developing a project and sinking large amounts of money into it before they had their permits. And then if there was a hiccup in the permitting process, they went through the legislature or some other nefarious process to get their way.
I think I just answered that question. They don't generally.
You said the list was
it's
long. You did not
violation.
point to a single example.
No, I said there's a long list of instances in which the development community or businesses rightfully go to the legislature to seek changes in that they think will be beneficial. That's fine. But if you're talking specifically about a business or industry, a developer building a project without a permit, it generally, if it happens, it's a violation. We assess those people civil penalties for doing that because the way our permitting programs are set up is to require permits in advance of building that project.
And you specifically mentioned water quality, and I know of projects where the developer was waiting on their 401 certifications and their 404 authorizations, and they had their grading permit in hand, and they went ahead and spent millions of dollars developing their project, waiting before they had their water quality permits. They complied with all the laws and rules by not impacting those resources, just like someone needing an air quality permit can build their site but cannot go operational.
Okay, so let's stop it here. I think points are taken on both sides, and specifics or non-specifics points are taken. Other comments or discussion on the motion? Mr. Hardison.
Well, my comment was to address Commissioner Smith's comment. So, but I don't know that that's allowed.
You have the floor if you would like to have another comment, but I don't want to start piling on specifics if we don't have specifics or we do. I don't want to get into that trivial debate among commissioners. I just, everybody heard it and we can vote accordingly to how we make up our minds. So if you have a question to add on or enhance that, fine. If not, let's take it on a different subject matter. Okay. Anybody else? Comments? Okay, boy, that's exciting. Let's raise hands on this one because I think we're going to be a little split. So we have a motion on the floor in a second. All in favor, say aye. Raise your hands. Aye. Okay, all opposed? Raise your hands. Yeah, and the chair will break the tie. Guys, I don't know how many people will use this, but I do know it's another tool in the toolbox. And I do know it's something that when people do need it, they will really need it. And so I will vote for it, which would give us, Council, what's the vote? 8-7. Any changes of votes? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. Let's take about a 5-minute break. 22.
Hey, I won't go anywhere. I just had a picture running down the hall.
Do that.
I knew we had minutes of discussion. JD?